So I think this idea of that we evolve into a planet is a new idea that I've only heard through the Aetherius Society, and Theosophy kind of hints at it, but it does give you a purpose beyond where I see Podsongs being. It's that I eventually, have to evolve into a much greater being.
Podcast Junkies, episode 285. Welcome back. I'm your host, Harry Duran. Newcomers, welcome. This is the show where we seek out interesting folks in podcasting, whether they've just recently gotten started with their shows or been doing them for years. We'll probably get to the point where that's going to be decades, and that's going to be kind of nuts. But we just want to hear what's on their mind, what inspired them, and where their podcast path has taken them. It's really interesting. I'll touch on that in a second with this week's guest. But if you haven't checked out last week's episode, it's with Tristan Pellegrino. He's the co-host of the Recorded Content podcast and the founder of Motion Agency. He's been doing some nice promo work on the socials with our episode, so make sure you give that a listen. It's fascinating to talk to other agency owners, and I'm of the opinion that a rising tide lifts all boats. So it's not where I really feel like it's competition. It's really cooperation or co-opetition. I think some people have tried to have some fun with those two words, and that's what I feel. And last week or the week before, had another agency owner on as well. So all in all, I think it's really speaks to the things that I'm passionate about. This episode's brought to you by Focusrite, and specifically the Scarlett 2i2 sound card, one of my favorite go-to sound cards, something I use for each and every podcast recording. The 3G line is a go-to for all new podcasters. Find out more at podcastjunkies.com/Focusrite, and the link will be in the show notes as well. This week, Jack Stafford, host of Podsongs, is my featured guest. He's a singer-songwriter and a self-described modern-day troubadour. We talk about his passion for creating good songs for good causes. And Podsongs, the first season, it's a unique show. It's a podcast format where he was interviewing the people on the show and creating an original song for each episode, which boggles my mind in terms of the logistics involved with that. And for season 2, he's partnered with a group of musicians, and essentially the musician is going to interview the guest, and then they're going to write the song. So it's not all on Jack at that point. We have a really rich discussion about not only Podsongs, podcasting, but we delve into spirituality, which was something that I didn't expect, and it really took a really nice and fun turn. We talk about motivation behind creation and the importance of preserving knowledge for future generations. We learn about his background, and obviously can't have a discussion in podcasting without talking about the lockdowns and how that led him to podcasting. And he's on a new mission. He's going to talk about that a bit on this interview. He talks about future projects and what he hopes to achieve. So it's really inspiring. And I think when you're actively listening and engaging with your guests, like I like to do, you just open yourself up to some interesting paths. And this was definitely one of those. And so I'm really excited to hear the feedback on this episode from you guys. As always, if you're enjoying this episode or past episodes, leave a rating and review at ratethispodcast.com/podcast junkies, and I'll be sure to read those out on future episodes. I'm going to be checking next episode for any of the boostograms that have come in. So if you're hearing this episode and you're using one of the apps at newpodcastapps.com and you are going to be in the mood for supporting your favorite shows through Satoshis, then you can do that at one of those apps, newpodcastapps.com. Leave a boostergram, and I'll be sure to read that out on future episodes, ideally next episode as well. So check that out. Always look to see what's happening on the bleeding edge of podcasting, and that definitely fits the bill. We're going to have Dave Jones from Podcasting 2.0 on the show soon. I have an outreach to him, and he's been kind enough to agree, so it's just a matter of getting it scheduled. Looking forward to that, to sort of demystify and break down what's been happening in that space. Podcasting 2.0 is one of my go-to podcasts. Okay, I think that's enough of the intro talk. Let's get into this really fascinating discussion with Jack, and make sure you stay to the end of the episode where I reveal this week's retention hashtag. So Jack Stafford, host of Podsongs, thank you for joining me on Podcast Junkies.
Great to be here, Harry. Thanks for having me.
So for the benefit of the listener, do you want to share how we cross paths?
Yeah, for sure. Well, I reached out because I'm just trying to spread the word about Podsongs, and why not go to the original Junkie, no?
How did you come across the show, Podcast Junkies?
Through my researcher, actually. I was looking for the most established shows to reach out to, and she did the business for me.
When did you start Podsongs?
1 year ago, actually.
1 year ago. Okay.
1 year, yeah.
What were you listening to at the time that inspired you?
Well, I released an album. I'm a musician, and I'd released an album, and we're in the middle of this COVID pandemic. I don't know if you've heard about it.
Yeah, so I was where you were at the time in your podcast journey, what made you decide to start the show since it's only been a year?
Yeah, so we're in the middle of this pandemic, and not being able to travel as a musician, not being able to perform, I used guest podcasting to go on other people's podcasts as a way to promote my album and talk about myself for an hour. I mean, it's not too bad, is it? Because as a musician, you're normally given a very small amount of time, on the radio or in a press interview, and then they can change your words. But with a podcast, it's, you're just doing a big brain dump about how wonderful your lyrics are and your music and your whole, how fantastic you are. And we don't have to get into that today, Harry. Don't worry. I'm not going to ask you any difficult questions about which is your favorite song or album, although I might get into that later.
Yeah.
But
yeah, we could.
But so I thought, this is fun. I could do this. I like doing this, so I should do this. But I need an idea, I mean, everyone, you've got Podcast Junkies. You're very clear. You interview all the other podcast hosts and the best people, the best hosts, and we all learn from each other. But, what am I going to host a songwriting podcast? I mean, that's pretty boring. I mean, that's been done. So, but, I'm a troubadour. I'm a super troubadour. I go around the world and I meet people. I'm inspired and I write a song about them. So 1-on-1, 2 together, I interview people, well-known people, and I write a song inspired by the conversation.
So when you say, so I think for folks that are not musically inclined, they may hear a word like troubadour and not have any context for it. So how would you define that?
A troubadour is the guy with a lute going around from town to town singing the old songs of yore back in the day, and being, in the king's court, etc., etc. Was much more. I had a better job back in the day. I had the kings and queens and the courtiers, and it was much better. Nowadays, I toured the world doing house concerts.
Okay, when did that start?
That started in I lived in Amsterdam for 10 years, and then I went traveling for 2 years, and this was about 2011, I think. And it was fantastic to be able to, go from place to place, sleep on someone's couch, play for all their friends, pass around the hat, sell CDs. This was back in the day. And so I got used to being a storyteller. I'd tell stories of the places I'd been, of the logging protester I'd stayed with, or the hospital, or the people like in the other town, and like in the olden days. So, I did this for a long time before I settled in Italy, and, so I kind of got good at it. And so that translates now into a podcast where I get people on the show, have a conversation with them. They tell me all about their life and their work, as you do. But whereas you just have to press publish, I have to go away and really, because we do a whole production, I write the song, and then we do drums, bass, guitar, the full, and then we release the song on Spotify. So in the last year, I've released 100 songs.
Wow.
And yeah, as well as the 100 podcasts. The episodes are easy. I mean, anyone could, not to generate your work, it's the writing the song is harder afterwards. So
sure. But that's the format that you chose. Why specifically did you settle on this format for the show?
Well, it had never been done. No one was stupid enough to do it before. So now I've done it. And yeah, there is the Ben Folds, who has also started one called Lightning Bugs, and he interviews people, and then he cuts up the interview and makes a song and a video. But he doesn't release the songs on Spotify. So these are proper songs that we release, and some of the best songs I've ever written, because, if you go to the gym every day 100 times in a year, you get stronger. And
oh, sure.
So I'm getting better as a songwriter, as a music producer, as an interviewer, hopefully as a guest. You'll have to let me know at the end. So it's been a fantastic musical journey for me without ever leaving my home.
Where did the passion for music start?
Well, I never really had it when I was young. My brother was a harmonica player, and I think it's more of that competitive edge. He started doing it because our father was very into the blues. And so I started just playing the guitar because he was a harmonica. And this was when I was in my late teens, 19, 20. And then I came into it very late, and I'm 44 now, and I've only been playing, releasing albums for the last 15 years. So it just goes to show, you're never too late.
Do you perform under Jack Stafford?
Yeah.
Okay.
I am kind of fading out now because after doing 100 songs in a year, I get kind of bored of the sound of my own voice now, and I'm having guest musicians on to sing songs. So Podsongs 2.0 is guest musicians coming on to interview their heroes or interview people who inspire them. So I'm kind of sharing the experience. So it's becoming a format, a program,
a brand.
Yeah, rather than just me playing all the time. Because otherwise, it doesn't feel like it was developing. It feels like I'm not. What am I going to try and break world records here? Am I going to release 100 songs every year? What's...
Sure.
But with this way, I'm kind of... Because it's a wonderful experience to get someone on and, you really engage with them. And, they've put so many... When someone's written a book, they put a lot of thought into that. And so basically with a song, you get the dust jacket and then the blurb is on the back. And that's the key takeaways. So if you could... That's a 3-minute song there. So... You get these people with fantastic ideas who've really distilled down the ideas for you. They've done all the thinking for you. All you do is make it rhyme a little bit and you sound really intelligent. And it's gone really well. So I want to give this experience to other musicians so they choose the guest.
Okay.
They choose who they want to interview, because over the past year, the most rewarding interviews have been the ones, not when someone's written a book, but when they've done it for a good cause, to air quality or air pollution, something to save the planet, to save humanity. It's still interesting to interview famous authors and activists and writers, but when someone is an activist, when they're really working for the betterment of humanity in service to others, then you feel more motivated, and the results are better. So that's what I'm trying to, protest songs, wrongful convictions, for example, or political change or human rights, because these songs, if you're putting this much work into it, you might as well do it for a good cause that's going to make the world a better place. And
why is that mission important to you?
Well, I think it first came from, I'm a member of a spiritual organization called the Aetherius Society, and the motto is, service is the jewel in the rock of attainment. So I came into...
How do you spell that?
Aetherius is Aethrius. Aetherius means one who travels through the ethers. So it's a very small, I can say elite spiritual organization. It's not got many members. It's quite ahead of its time. It's kind of more of a religion for the future. It says it's UFOs and yoga. This kind of combination of...
Well, I'm sure we'll get into that because listeners will know that that's a topic that's very top of mind for me. So
okay, well we can maybe we should leave that because once you've gone there, it's hard to come back to the dot.
Yeah, we'll pace ourselves here. Where did you grow up?
In England, Lincoln in England, but really I grew up when I moved to Amsterdam because it's an amazing city, and I didn't really start growing until I moved there.
Have you been mostly a musician for most of your career?
No, I was a musician in England, and then I got a job. I applied for many jobs after university. They said you need to earn this stuff called money, and being a musician is not a great way to do that. So I applied for many jobs, and one of them jobs was to be a copywriter in the Netherlands, and it was the only job as a copywriter, and I applied for it. It was the only job outside England, and I suddenly got it. So first job out of university, and because they said if you can write songs, you can probably write copy, So I ended up writing kind of for Philips in Eindhoven brochures, and this was even before websites. So yeah, and I kind of developed from there, and I did 10 years as a copywriter and became like a pimp for copywriters, had my own agency. So all that stood me in good stead for Podsongs now, because I've I've got this organizational background, I've got this promotional background. So I think it was there was obviously a plan there to give me some more rather than just 3 chords and the truth, in this day and age.
Did the copywriting help you improve your songwriting?
Yes, definitely, because I had to have a concept, an idea behind each song. So I couldn't just write. If you listen to the lyrics of modern music, it's not usually the most rewarding experience. So with mine, there's always an idea, there's always something to communicate. So, for example, I'm very into Ayurveda. That's something I got interested in when I was traveling, and because it's very discombobulating on a life on the road as a musician. I mean, you're eating different food in a different place every time. You're bouncing around like a beach ball. You're, different time zones, different temperatures, and it really messes you up. So I got into Ayurveda, which is the kind of the Chinese medicine, the equivalent in India. I don't know if you've heard about this, but it's very, very old, and it's a super logical system about, eating in season, balancing the doshas, hot, cold, dry, light, as well as many other medicines. So I studied to be a practitioner when I moved to Italy, and went to India quite a few times. And there's these Ayurveda originally, if you go way back through the books, is based on these sutras. So there was one called Ashtanga Hridayam, so they used to remember the medical textbook, and it's all in poetic form. So it's much easier for our minds to remember things in prose. Is that right? Prose, yeah. In verse. So it's if it rhymes, if it flows, it flows to the next. So I wrote an album of songs based on the sutras, but translating them into English rhymes, so that you could remember for example, the perfect daily regime through a 3-minute pop song.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, so I did that it was like 18 songs on that album, and it's just trying to preserve information for future generations and spread this information through the medium of song, or poetry in that case.
And these albums are on Spotify?
Yeah, they're all on Spotify, yeah.
So this idea of preserving music, it's interesting. It's this idea of taking age-old wisdom and converting it into different formats for newer generations to appreciate, in this case, music. But even what you're doing with the podcast, you're mixing an interview with, the story of this guest, and then putting your skills as a musician into that to then translate what would normally be a podcast episode into music. Why is this idea of preserving knowledge or passing information on across generations, why is that something that's important for you?
I guess, like you say, it goes to that copywriting background, is that you get this brief, which is this very complicated, boring document, and you're supposed to pull out the benefits from the features. And so when I interviewed, a sleep doctor, and he talks about there are these different chronotypes, and we're all a different chronotype, and you can sleep based on your type of biorhythm. So if I put that into a song, more people will hear about that. More people will go and study his book.
Yeah.
And they learn there's these things called chronotypes. And
what rhymes with chronotype?
I just moved that word to the front of the sentence, yeah, because that was a bit difficult, yeah.
And biorhythm.
Yes. So I interviewed many scientists, and because they were very flattered, because I reached out to all the people who've been all the top podcasts, Joe Rogan and everyone, and they get hundreds of podcast requests. But I'm a nobody here in Italy. I didn't have many listeners on Spotify before this, but just the fact that somebody reaches out and wants to write a song about you or your work is incredibly flattering, and not many people said no. So I did get some well-known professors in all the top universities, and it's been an educational year. I'm a smarter guy.
What was your criteria? Like, how did you decide who you wanted to have a conversation with? I'm sure you had a dream list of folks as well.
Well, I had the idea that I thought that if you interview famous people, you will become famous. So I had people with over 100,000 Twitter followers. But in the end, that wasn't really a great idea, because...
That doesn't necessarily mean they're interesting people.
Exactly. I mean, they had been on podcasts before, so they knew what to say. But as I found out that you get the same interview that they've given the week before, because I researched them while I'm doing my gardening in the morning, and I knew all the jokes, all the stories before I even heard them. So, and the second thing was that they just tweeted the song once when it was produced, which, afterwards they'd had for breakfast and, 10 other tweets that day. So now I'm going also for good causes, but for smaller people who will be partners for the whole process. So they'll share all the artists' posts about, when they're writing the lyrics, when they're looking for inspiration. They want to have this synergy. So, a songwriter will interview someone if they're passionate about suicide prevention, for example, will partner with a suicide prevention charity and make it a whole 6-month, social media plan. And so then it's much more benefit to the organization and the artists. They kind of swap audiences, you understand? So
sure.
They share each other's posts. And so even though there's one episode a week, 52 episodes a year, they'll be running parallel all these different promotional. So they'll be going all the time, because I'm not having to tweet myself about all these things. The artists will be doing this. So hopefully this is how my new criteria for guest is, who's the most interesting and who the artist chooses. If the artist is really into, one person is really into retro clothes, vintage clothes, recycling clothes as a way to solve the planet. Another one's interested in controlling their dreams, and has been watching this YouTube channel, so they want to interview that person. So the artist chooses, and then there's this passionate connection. They really want to write the song. They're up for the interview. Everything else flows because of the motive. So motive is everything, an unselfish motive.
When you have the interviews, I'm speaking for myself sometimes as I'm having these conversations, and I take it upon myself to make sure that the conversation continues, that it continues to flow, that it's entertaining, that the guest is engaged, that I'm always conscious of the listener is always part of this conversation. So that's the third person in the room as well. As you have these conversations, I can't help but think that you're also thinking ahead as to what this song is going to sound like. And so there's a lot of things happening while you're having the conversation. But talk a little bit about what goes through your mind as an interviewer, maybe separate out the musician part, but as you think about preparing and actually conducting the interview, is there prep work, and how does that flow go?
Well, with the new format, I let the musician do the work. I'm a supreme delegator, as you probably. So they do all the heavy lifting now. But before, I used to listen to the past podcasts and write down all the questions that the most intelligent host had asked the guest. So I knew they know the answer. I know this is a good question.
How do you define an intelligent host?
Well, if they were asking a really good question, and the host and the guests give a really good answer. So I'd write down the questions. I wouldn't necessarily use them, but there's nothing worse than an interview I found than running dry, having no questions to ask, because there seem to be two types of guests. Some people who are just going to talk, and you're, as a host, you're basically in the way, interrupting a few times. So they can talk forever. Not really, but some people will.
But the question on that first one, they can talk forever. What I would be listening out for is, are they saying anything meaningful?
Those are okay to me, but the worst people were the ones who just, when I'm finishing my thought here, I'm going to slightly slow down to let you know that I'm finished, and then you'll ask me a question. But some people, they'll just stop, and then you've got to got to have the question. I know now that I can edit, and I shouldn't be panicking.
Sure,
but I don't like to edit because I have this bloody song to do, so I don't do any editing or anything on the pod because I'm 100% concentrated on the song. So I just found this new software, Descript, which is...
Oh, I love it. I use Descript, yeah.
How good is that? I mean, how life-changing.
It removes the ums and ahs. It removes long pauses. I've been testing out the mastering. It's a simple mastering tool. You can apply it on each channel.
Yeah.
I've been doing video edits at 2x on it. It's an amazing. I've actually had Andrew on a couple of times on Podcast Junkies, Andrew Mason, the founder.
Oh, wow. Well, yeah. Send him a Christmas card from me because...
And for the listeners who may not recognize the name, he's the former CEO of Groupon.
Wow, he's a smart cookie.
Yeah.
So that's made it easier, but when there's a huge long pause, dead air, it's a kind of a panic, isn't it?
It used to be. I think it's what I've told people, it'd be uncomfortable with silence if you're asking a question that would require a thoughtful response. Because, and this is where the video comes in handy, the fact that we can see each other, body language, your point, nuances in people's like articulation and speed of speaking. Those are all things as a podcast host you have to get good at and learn how to manage and do that dance back and forth. But I've tried to be more conscious of letting people sit with their answers. And you can see people turn their head, they look up to the left or the right, whatever it is, when they're trying to access that memory part of their brain. And I know that what I feel sometimes is there's an inner dialogue happening, and it says, do I give the short answer that I give all the time? Or do I feel like this is a safe space where I can open up and I can give a more meaningful answer to that question?
That's great. I wanted to have a podcast with no questions. So, because, if someone comes round your house for dinner,
yeah,
you never say, I've got nothing to ask them.
Let me pull out my questions for you.
Yeah. That never happens. You're worried about what food to cook or if they're infected with coronavirus or anything like that. But you don't say. So it would be nice to have a podcast with no questions, because as soon as I pause, you can't shut people up. They're all jumping in. But I don't like those guests who come on and say, okay, ask me another question. Yep, ask me another question. That's just, there's no flow there. You know what I mean?
I think it's a acquired skill, and I think it comes with repetition, and you have to have a genuine curiosity and an interest in the other person or what that other person has to say. I always say that every person has a story. Like, we could go into a pub, there'll be 100 people there. If you took the time and spent an hour with each one of the people in that pub, a genuine interest in them, natural curiosity, learn how to follow threads, ask questions that go deeper. Just when people tell you something, this is that mantra or the maxim of the 5 whys. Like, let's see, someone gives you an answer, you ask them, well, why'd you do that? And they'll give you an answer, and you're like, well, why'd you do that? And then they'll give you another answer. If you keep asking that, you'll get to the core of like why it is they do what they do. And to your, earlier example, I love listening to really good podcast hosts. Like, I'm friends with Jordan Harbinger. I've listened to Tim Ferriss, and there's Terry Gross, NPR. Alec Baldwin has a great podcast. I grew up watching 60 Minutes, 2020, just Diane Sawyer, and just all these just range of people whose job it is to really get people to say something meaningful. And it's fascinating to me to do that in a way that pulls the story out of the person. And sometimes it's a story they didn't realize that they were ready to tell or ready to share.
You think people are nervous sometimes, though, because when we're telling the story we told 10 times before, it's easy, but if I'm having to tell something new, it doesn't flow as easy.
Yeah, and that's the magic there, because when there's a bit of discomfort, it's because it's something that evokes an emotion in you, or it's something that you haven't spoken about in a long time, or it's something you really hold deeply, a belief or something that you care about. And that's why I ask a lot of questions about like the motive behind why people do the things that they do, because, normally, I think 9 times out of 10, it'll reveal something about their character or how they were raised or what they value most in life.
Yeah, because I have this amazing idea, write songs about it. The interview's kind of secondary for me, so I do kind of neglect that part. I wouldn't say it was the strongest point, and now I've kind of abdicated responsibility, because another thing I noticed was that even if the guest shares the interview, none of their followers are interested, because they're telling the same thing that they've told 100 times before. But with the bands, this is the first time they've ever hosted a podcast. So their audience, it's a one-off thing. So they're super interested. And that's why I let them, even if it's, because every episode is completely different. Some people are bad interviewers, some people are great, some people talk a lot, some people talk not. So it doesn't really matter, because I know it's their fans who are coming to get this episode. So for that reason, the interviews can be a plane crash sometimes, but it doesn't matter, because you never know what you're going to get. It's a fun thing.
Yeah, I've started to call these conversations instead of interviews, and I've been thinking of my guests more as co-hosts. Like it feels like, and I haven't formalized it, but I think it's really, we are co-creating this interview together.
Right.
And, it should be a back and forth, and it shouldn't just be you passively waiting as a guest to wait for what I have to say so that you can give your most, insightful answer that's going to make you look as witty and intelligent as possible. My goal is to have people, let their hair down and just relax. And to your point, like when you invite someone over, if you go to a bar, there's no questions. You're genuinely curious in the person. Like I'm just curious in how long you've been a creator. Like when was that active or most alive for you? And it could be when you started the music, and obviously, there's this sense that you continuously need to be creating. So I'm wondering when that sensation was alive for you that you can remember.
Well, it goes with the flow. It has to be a purpose. I could go for a year without writing a song because they come very easily to me. I really do channel them. I don't, you've asked me about the interview process, and for the songwriting process, there is no process. You make some notes, you distill everything down, you concentrate on the interview, and then your higher consciousness will come up with the song. If you try and write it in a formulaic way, then it's going to be a disaster. So usually there's some line in the song, there's their key idea, as I said, usually the title of their book. So, and when you have a sentence like, you are responsible, or drunk on the cork, or, the song title, then you kind of work your way around that. So there's the need to be creative when there is a vacuum, when there is not. If everyone already did this, if you go away and you do a painting of me after the show, or you're a sculptor, and if everyone is inspired on every podcast to do something artistic, I wouldn't do it because it's not necessary. I'm always about the vacuum. So there is a vacuum there, I'm doing it. There's also a vacuum for knowledge and wisdom. And this is what I'm trying to do. There's a need, so I have to do it.
What's driving that need?
Well, the reason I started this show was this Aetherius Society, because I came across these teachings. So, I've been around the world. I've met a lot of people. I've studied a lot of things, as I'm sure you have. But when I learnt about the teachings, it just blew my mind. And this is the reason I thought I've got to make the number one. I've got to promote this somehow, in a way. What are the tools open to me? So my music, it was the main one, and now there's this podcast. So there's this drive, because ignorance is the only crime on the earth. And if we can solve this, then everything else will be solved, all the other problems.
Do you remember what your earliest recollection of something you created was?
Well, let's recollect. The thing that pops into my mind was because we're coming up to Christmas, so a Christmas present where I wrapped all the presents together one by one. So there was a huge present at the end, because every present was inside another present.
Okay.
So I think it was when I was quite young.
So let's move into the Aetherius. I'm curious when that spiritual journey started for you.
Sure. Well, I was in India. I was going for some Ayurvedic treatment. I found a very good doctor. And I don't know if you know anything about Ayurveda, but it's been quite popularized. There's a lot of clinics and holiday resorts where you go for your Ayurvedic massages, your panchakarma. But found a really good doctor. I went to the source, and he had a guru, and he was in the family as well, because these sutras I was telling you about, they're passed down orally from father to son, son to son to son, I'm afraid, not daughters usually. So he gave me this very powerful treatment, and I started waking up every night at 3:33 on the dot, which is quite unusual. And so what do you Google it, and you say, and it says it's a higher self trying to contact you, or an angel, or your spirit guide, or something like that. So look for synchronicities in your daytime. So I did that, and everyone started mentioning Kundalini, Kundalini, Kundalini. I was staying behind a Kundalini center. The taxi driver mentioned it. The doctor mentioned it. And he told me to read a book called The Serpent Power, which is about the raising of Kundalini, but it's a very complicated book. So again, I went back to the internet and YouTube, and I found this online class, and this teacher, he really went through it, and he was in Miami, and then he talks about the Aetherius Society as well, and his teacher, Dr. King. So I'm in India learning about this spiritual awakening of an Englishman. I always wanted to meet someone in robes, with the real yogi.
Yeah.
So, and the teachings were so amazing and so far advanced. They're mind-blowing, so I had to promote them. So I started Podsongs and made it my mission.
So you started Podsongs as a way to share those stories initially?
Yeah, well, I wanted, if I make the number one podcast, then I drop in periodically guests from the Aetherius Society or yogis. And I've actually started a new podcast now called The Mystic Cast, where I just indulge my interest in the psychic and the UFOs and the Aetherius Society. And now, so I'm really trying to, the Podsongs will just be more mainstream, because it's a lot for, I know Joe Rogan goes on about UFOs a lot, but he also, people skip episodes. Many people skip episodes, although more people believe in UFOs than God now. So,
yeah, I mean, it's such a complicated rabbit hole, because just by definition of the word and the acronym itself, unidentified flying objects, it doesn't really tell you much about what it is. Then you have to go deeper and ask people like what they believe about what is out there in the stars and multidimensional reality and, other star systems. And just, for me, it's logical to assume that we are not alone. I've done plant medicine, ayahuasca, and what I feel is direct communication with spirit. So it's interesting, this awakening that's happening that Joe is also facilitating, which I love. He had Jimmy Carlucci on talking about ancient civilizations. I'm a huge fan of Atlantis stories, but it's funny because the myth is being married with the science, and they're coming closer and closer together. I'm friends with a woman named Robin Maxwell, who's just finished up a 5-part saga about the gods of Atlantis. So she takes the original teachings of Plato and the fact that he wrote about these ancient civilizations and creates a whole story around it. And she pulls in, some of these older books that would probably fall into the metaphysical, and she's created this fantastic story. So it's a mix of, fiction and truth, and it's really fascinating to read, because when I read it and I know the backstories, it's interesting that some of this is going to make its way into the consciousness of other people. But I believe that that's how it happens. Like, everyone plays their part and introduces their seed, and then when people hear enough of it from different sources, I feel like in some way it confirms what they've known in their heart to be true.
Yeah, I found a kindred spirit.
Which of the folks from Aetherius made their way into Podsongs?
I've interviewed the founders. Sorry, not the founder. The master, Dr. King, who has now passed on to another realm. But I've interviewed the presidents. It's based in America and in England. So it started with Dr. King. So after the war, he did 8 hours of yoga every day for 10 years. So, I mean, I'm talking the real yoga, the pranayama, the mantra.
Yeah.
So he raised Kundalini up to the crown chakra. And so he became up Sushumna, and he became fully enlightened. So he had, I don't know if you've read Autobiography of a Yogi. That's kind of
a long time ago, yeah.
So there's enlightenment, cosmic consciousness, and then ascension. So the Buddhas, Jesus ascended, the Buddhas ascend, the ascended masters. So what the Aetherius Society, the teaching says, is that when you ascend, then you can go onto another classroom, which is on another planet, because there's the electromagnetic spectrum, and every point there is physicality. So when we die here on this earth, we go to the astral plane, which is exactly here in this room, but just a different frequency of vibration. So all the dark matter and the dark energy is in the planets, but just at different frequencies. So the other planets are all habited, but they might be gas at our frequency, but at a higher level, there's their earth and their cities and temples, and so it's not some faraway galaxies that's but it's all this different frequency of vibration. So with Atlantis and Lemurius, we came from another planet before this, and Maldek, which is now the asteroid belt, because we destroyed it. We split the atom, and then we came here, and then we went through these civilizations, probed the atom, the Earth turned on its axis, and destroyed the civilizations. And so we're now in our present civilization, the third time lucky, hopefully. And so Dr. King and also the Jesus and Buddha were Mahabodhisattvas who were asked to incarnate, because it's all about karma. It's all about, they can't just land openly because karmically we haven't earned it, and it would be a very karmically bad for us if we insulted them in any way. So when they reincarnate through the womb of a woman, like Jesus, the Star of Bethlehem, was a UFO, and there were 3 stars around the Buddha, and also George King, they incarnate from these other planets into our life stream, and then whatever they do here, because they're in a human body, they're allowed to perform these acts. And Jesus also did these years of yoga in Tibet, 40 days to raise Kundalini as well, and so all the teachings match the ancient Vedic teachings or the Tibetan teachings, and so there's all this lineage which comes down through theosophy and now to the Aetherius Society, which I'm trying to get the word out about.
When did this become what seems to me like a mission for you?
Well, yeah, when I started Podsongs, so 1999, 2 years ago, I started having this experience, and I didn't have any psychic experience. I'm just purely basing this on the logic of reading the 9 Freedoms, which is the main book, and then the 12 Blessings, which Dr. King channeled by the Master Jesus. And so, yeah, and there's, I've studied as many hours of Dr. King's lectures, and it's so incredibly fascinating, and I want to get more of the word out about it.
So what's next for you then?
Well, I've got to get Podsongs up there, so I'm collaborating.
Do you think it's going to be through Podsongs 2.0, which is the next iteration, right?
Right. You're paying attention.
But how does that enhance or help fulfill that aspect of what you're trying to do and support the Aetherius Society? Well,
with hopefully fundraising, because if it gets, I'm collaborating with 50 artists a year, so we release those on Spotify. So every week we have a single release. That's more than most record companies. It's a lot of collaboration. So every week a big media launch. It's not just a podcast episode.
Are you treating these songs as like a label release? Is there that's in the works as well?
Yeah, no, I release them on my label through Spotify, and so the episode goes one week, then the song the next week, and then the music video the next week. So, and that's 50 times a year.
There's going to be a video now too.
There's music video for every song. So yeah.
And who's doing the video?
One of my friends here in the Cilento in Italy. So it's a full music release every week. So hopefully, bit by bit, more famous artists, because the numbers go up. So, and record companies are just about the numbers. So if the numbers go up and it's an audience for their artist, then they will do it, and then the people bigger than will do it, and then so there's this accumulative effect. So that should raise money, and secondly, there'll be this trickle down promotional effect that hopefully people check out the Mystic Cast, and there we do the heavy breathing, and so yeah, that's the strategy.
What are you hoping to accomplish, or what's the goal with Mystic Cast?
There I interview people interested in ancient civilizations, UFOs, and other members of the Aetherius Society. So it's your classic alternative podcast, but with the other members talking. So they're doing it. They've all done presentations, and they're already giving excellent presentations. I'm much more than myself, because I'm just a 2-year member. I'm just a basic student. So yeah, and then we want to raise money to build a temple. And because it is a very, very tiny organization, it's a couple of thousand people. So, whereas the Scientologists,
maybe not the best example,
but they are a UFO They are an organization that is also has beliefs in this, as an example of a new religion that I know that, you got to take examples from the guys that are working. It's working for, even if you don't agree with them. So I take some tools from them.
What's your hope with the show?
Oh, please say that again. It just cut out.
What's your hope with the show?
Well, to get to the top of the poppermost.
Why? Yeah, but why? I mean, everyone says that. Every podcaster says that. But the question is why? Like, why? Is it for fame? Is it for exposure? Is it for your brand? Is it for because of the message?
Yeah, the motive to raise money for the society. Because if we have huge streaming numbers, you don't get too much from it. But hopefully that would lead to income for the society. And secondly, I'd be invited on more shows like yours. At the end, I can go weird. They have me on in the beginning, and then I can tell them about, and there'll be this trickle-down effect because, most people listening to this will just roll their eyes, but because we're in this reincarnatory cycle where on the other realms, the membership's much higher, and so when you're born back on this realm, there are some people who will just say, it'll just take one word for them to connect. So yeah, you can't fill a glass that's full. A lot of people they have their beliefs and I'm not going to change them. But some people are searchers, some people have tried Buddhism, have tried Christianity, have been to India looking for yogis, and they'll just connect. They'll realize that it's quite logical that if you believe in reincarnation, we're in a reincarnatory cycle. If it's evolutionary, we're going up, where are we going? And I'm seeing UFOs in the sky. It's possible, logical, that I get to drive one of those things one day.
Is that the goal?
Well, it takes it takes 20,000 years to learn to drive one of them, because once you incarnate on another planet, you don't do it through the womb. You go through the logos of the earth, and you retain. Reincarnation is unconscious. Incarnation is consciousness. And so, as you go up and up, you still have a physical body there, but eventually you go into beings who are just ovoids, and then you vibrate together with other beings, and you form you eventually become a planet. Eventually. So the planet is a living being. That's millions and billions of lives. So we evolve into planets. Planets evolve, reincarnate into the suns into galaxies. If you look through the Hubble telescope, those are intelligent beings, billions of times. So I think this idea that we evolve into a planet is a new idea that I've only heard through the Aetherius Society, and Theosophy kind of hints at it, but it does give you a purpose beyond where I see Podsongs being. It's that I eventually, have to evolve into a much greater being. It gives you because even with Buddha, it's, you go to nirvana. I mean, it's very vague. So this is really kind of a concrete path. So I hope to be driving one of those. Yes, is the answer to your question.
Lots more to unpack there, and I'm sure people have a couple of different paths to take. If they're interested in your journey as a musician and as an artist and as a creator, then definitely Podsongs and Podsongs 2.0. But I think what you're doing with Mysticast is just as fascinating. And to your point, when, it's sort of like the student is ready, the teacher appears, or when their journey in life takes them to a point where they feel like they're now in alignment and they can open up to receive this information. And what I always say with all this type of stuff, because it gets a little heady and it gets a little out there, take what resonates and discard the rest. It just means it's not resonating with you, and it doesn't all have to. I think what people need to appreciate and understand is, there could be 80% of what you said that really gets them excited, and then there's the 20% that they just there's a mental block, or just what the vibration is not there and not in alignment. But that doesn't mean that the 80% is not something that you can use in your everyday. So always, and what I tell listeners and I tell folks that I talk to about this stuff, it doesn't have to be, it's not an all or nothing. It's not like, okay, here's everything I know. And they're like, well, there's that 1% of the stuff that is too weird for me, so I'm going to discard everything. So just, open minds, I think, is really helpful in times like these, especially with what we're going through, especially with what the planet is going through, whether you call it ascension, whether you call it inscension, whether you call it awareness, awakening, consciousness. It's like they're all speaking to the same concept. And I think there is a need for a plethora of teachers, who can teach different aspects of it, because it's all the same teaching, but just delivered in different ways. And I think it's a fascinating time that we're going through. And it's no surprise that topics like this are coming to the forefront more and more. So I appreciate you, Jack, sharing your story, your journey, your podcasting journey, which has taken you onto this awakening metaphysical journey, which is going to be super exciting. And I can't wait to see how it turns out.
Wow, that's beautiful. Can I use that in my next interview?
Of course, yeah.
I'm making notes.
Let me know when you're ready for a song about my journey.
For sure, that would be
happy to share that as well.
That would be great.
Where's the best place for folks to start to learn more about all the stuff you've talked about?
Well, with the Aetherius Society is aetherius.org. Go to there for all the teachings. For Podsongs, it's Podsongs on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, or podsongs.com. That couldn't be easier. And the Mystic Cast is on the podsongs.com website, or you can also search through your podcast provider.
Yeah. Well, we'll make sure all those links are going to be provided in the show notes as well. So don't worry about taking notes if you're listening or in the car. And thanks again, Jack, for sharing your story. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Harry. Great. Thank you for having me.
So I hope the way I built up the show in the intro paid off. And for those of you that have listened all the way to this point, I hope you found value in it. And I really enjoyed how it was scratching my podcasting itch and my spirituality itch. And I wasn't expecting it, like I said at the beginning of the show. So I really appreciate Jack for being open and being vulnerable to sharing that aspect of his life's journey, which is always fun. Full show notes available at podcastjunkies.com/285. Intro and outro music composed by my good friend who I have not spoken to in years, George Abiana, aka Cedar and Soil, cedarsoil.com for his list of amazing music. Don't forget to support our sponsor, Focusrite. I know I've mentioned this several times, but check out their gear. It's at podcastjunkies.com/Focusrite. They're always coming up with new innovations in the world of podcasting. My Scarlett is tried and true, been with me for several years. I can't say enough good things about them and the team. Looking forward to connect with Dan at a future conference. Right now, the plan is to be at Podcast Movement Evolutions and PodFest in Orlando, and then Podcast Movement in Texas. I think it's in Fort Worth or Dallas in August. So those are the 3 podcasting related. Actually, another podcasting related conference will be the Indoor Ad Conference, and that's related to a second show that I host called the Vertical Farming Podcast, for those of you that don't know. Tune in next week for my conversation with husband and wife team Garrett and Sabrina. They're dinosaur enthusiasts, and they're the team behind I Know Dino. It's the biggest dinosaur podcast, and it covers news, interviews, and discussions about, guess what, dinosaurs. It's really fascinating, their story, how they ended up with this topic, and how the show has grown and become very, very popular. So tune in. That may come out later this week, if not a week from now, but be on the lookout for that. It's the I Know Dino episode. Don't forget to leave a rating and a review at ratespodcast.com/podcastjunkies. If you've made it this far, you're no doubt looking for this week's retention hashtag. Let's go with Troubadour Jack. Okay, and that's let's go with Troubadour Jack, and Troubadour is spelled TROUBADOUR, Jack. And you can tag us at podcast_junkies and Jack at Jack Troubadour on Twitter. Thanks for all you do to support the show. Talk to you next week.